This video is brought to you by Iron Jock, clothing for active performance, made with silver ion technology for maximum odor-fighting protection. Visit ironjock.com and get 20% off using the promo code Hitbombs. Iron Jock, it's what's inside.
All right, what's up, y'all? We're at TPC Sawgrass. We're gonna check out our nemesis, the man I hate the most, Kyle Berkshire. His traces and all his data. We're the guys from Swing Catalyst. We hit a few balls. We looked at my stuff. We looked at Josh. Now we're gonna look at Kyle's because we hate him. And I'm not even kidding. You're kidding. I'm not. No, I'm just kidding. We all love Kyle. So we're gonna look at what he does. We looked at something unique I did and he did. Now we're gonna take a look at Kyle.
And I mean, for Kyle, this is, to be fair, this was at the PGA show. So I don't know if you guys have ever hit at the PGA show, but like as soon as a guy like that gets up to hit, all these people start crowding around. And I remember before he swung, he had to like make sure he wasn't going to smash anyone with his club. He was like, okay, I got a little.
Yeah, I can kind of tell he's not going after. Just I don't know, for whatever reason, I can tell.
He wasn't getting to his dark place. Let's just say.
Well, plus we build the booth, and the netting is a little suspect.
Hey,
so.
Let's not big him up, all right? It was 148. Justin's was 158. Mine was 156.
There you go.
Something like that. So.
And this was when he was doing the serious stomping back and forth. So you can see he really gets the forces, the horizontal force going positive and negative. And you'll see he has that little bit of a blip to decelerate, not quite like you guys where you had the big deceleration blip and then another push off again. So interesting that you know, he kind of brought that in. I don't know if he brought it in. I mean, it's the first time I've seen it done, and now a lot of people are using it. I know like Lydia Ko's doing it now, and I've seen her do it.
I think Lydia is actually doing it. So someone told me that it's actually freeing her up more. You know, yeah. So from coming from, you know, a dark place of, you know, not being able to pull the trigger, I think it's one of the things that actually helps kind of free you up.
And I think that's what you said too, right? To get rid of tension. I think there's a timing aspect to it, right? Because it looks like to me, if you watch, the second that that trail foot hits the ground, boom, that's when the club starts moving away from the ball. So I think there's some kind of timing issue there that he uses. But and one thing that, you know, we had Kyle when his hair was shorter at the PGA show probably, I don't know, 4 years ago or so. And that was, he had a lot of torque, he had a lot of vertical, but his horizontal was really low. It was almost below the tour average. And I think this kind of rocking side to side is going to, what kind of promotes creating a little more horizontal force, and he has a good amount there. If we go to the pressure, and the cool thing here, you can see that his heel's almost off the ground and all his pressure is in the ball of his foot, and there's, it's the whole ball of his foot is lit up, right? So like he's not getting to the outside half of that foot. So that's something that I think would definitely be a kind of an energy leak or some kind of a loss of, because in any other sport, if you get to the outside of that foot, you're kind of done to go back the other way. And obviously the goal of this sport is to create momentum going in that direction. So if we get to the outside of that foot, so he's got the whole ball of his foot lit up there. And you can see the differences in his right foot position, right? His is flared significantly. And my hypothesis would be if we had an MRI of your hip and his hip, they would be completely differently aligned. And that's why he pushes way better from a more externally rotated position. You push a little better, I think, from an internally rotated position. Because that would just be probably each of your neutrals. Because I think that would probably be where most people could push the hardest from. So he creates that. He actually has a significant amount of negative torque as well. So this negative torque that we talked about in your swing as well, I think is a good measure of how much you're kind of creating that backswing torque and getting into that right hip.
And describe that again, just for people who didn't see my video.
So negative torque is where you're trying to produce reaction forces that spin your pelvis into a backswing position. So we know in the backswing, your right hip moves away from the ball. And so the only way that your right hip could move away from the ball is if you push your right foot towards the ball. So if I push my right foot towards the ball, that reaction force is going to shove my right hip away from the ball.
Got it.
And then the opposite too, right? So you're going to actually try to drag your left foot away from the ball, which is going to create a reaction force, shoving your left hip towards the ball, which is the complete opposite of what we do in our downswing. Where in our downswing, we're dragging that right foot away from the ball, which shoves the right hip forward. And so, but that negative torque, I think there's something to that in terms of like putting energy into the system and creating that stretch shortened cycles in the right hip that can allow you to bounce out of there. So that negative torque is really cool there. And he was the first one that I'd seen, where you can see in transition here as he starts to move into it, he hits that peak negative horizontal force right at the same point where it hits peak vertical force, which is what you did. Okay. And I would imagine with a healthy oblique, you would probably do the same thing.
What was his negative horizontal relative to mine?
His is 38% of his body weight. Yours was 60% of your body weight. So that's a lot. And yours is 100 and something pounds of horizontal braking force. And this was way more than I had ever seen before. In the past, I've been showing this swing to people and saying, this is the most braking force I've ever seen. And I think this is something that is correlated to speed. And this is something we had a discussion about before in terms of that frontal plane moment, right? Where when you're creating this negative horizontal force, it means that you're creating a braking force, right? Where this force is now leaning back away from the target, which would get it back closer to your center of mass, which would almost create I don't know if it would create a negative frontal plane moment, but it would definitely decrease that moment arm. And so that's where, the timing of that frontal plane moment is super important, and it's probably going to be at the top where we see this positive horizontal force, and that force is leaning that way, that you're going to create that moment and put energy into the system.
So talk about his torque, because his torque is actually higher than mine and Justin's, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
How would you kind of read that torque graph and interpret that?
It's how much you're trying to rotate your lower body, so push forward and backwards or create that force couple. And really, like when we talk about these three forces, we try to tune them to each individual. And you can see he gets to about 90% into his trail side, which would correlate with more of a horizontal swing. So that might be why, you get 100%, but it might be just because you're lifting your foot. I think if you left your foot down, it wouldn't get there. But this is just how linear or translational you are. This is how rotational you are, and this is how vertical you are. And maybe if you guys ramped up your torque, you might spin out and not produce as much speed. Like, who knows? Because really there's three ways you can produce speed, right? In the frontal plane, which is the horizontal, in the transverse plane, which is the torque, and in the sagittal plane, which is the vertical. And yours is clearly vertical, is your dominant ground reaction force pattern. And Kyle's, that one's getting close to vertical. I don't know, we're learning tons now. There aren't too many really long hitters where you don't see the foot like almost leave the ground, right? Most people, the foot lightens and moves. Shifts.
And that's showing up on that horizontal, the negative side of it.
The negative side and the vertical force, right? So the vertical is something that I used to tell people that I think to be a long driver, you have to have a lot of vertical force, because every long driver that I've seen has one. Gary Woodland is one of the people I've seen that has a lot of speed and he has a ton of torque, so he really spins, and I think he cuts it quite a bit too, which would make a lot of sense. And that would be something that I think your torque, based on ball flight, I think you were hitting draws today, right? And you try to hit cuts.
I faded a little bit.
Yeah, so I think generally you correlate this with more of a cutter of the golf ball. This is more of a drawer of the golf ball. That's where if you got a little more of that, and off of that right side more.
With adding speed, would you, if someone's lacking in a certain area, would you try to, so I do
vertical really well, yeah.
Okay. Would you say, okay, that's your thing, get that even better to add more speed, or would you say, hey, let's improve these other areas? It's like an MMA fighter, if it's a wrestler,
sure,
you're just going to wrestle, or no, let's try to throw the hands now. Or,
that's a really good question that I don't really know the answer to. Like, I know with some of Mike Adams' screens, so if you go see Mike Adams, he'll put you some tests and say, oh, this is what you should have, and he'll adjust your forces accordingly. And sometimes he's actually trying to bring forces down. And I've had that before, where I bring forces down and speed goes up, because if I bring one force down, something else comes up. And that's why I equate how I use this now, or how I originally used this before we got better at it with crappy golfers. Like with crappy golfers, I do some tests and I adjust the forces to them based on how they result the tests. With you guys, obviously now we're at N of 4, right? We've got Drew, you two guys, and Kyle. And so we're starting to learn a little bit, but I would equate it to like tuning an amplifier for a guitar or for a singer, right? You just adjust this and you go, does it sound good? Does it sound bad? So like I would give you some drills to get more of this. You'd hit, and then we'd look at the launch monitor and say, did we get more speed? Did it do what we wanted it to do? And then we look at the force. Did you actually produce the forces? And if you say, let's say I have more, if I add more horizontal force to your swing, but your vertical comes down, and speed goes down, I'm like, okay, that's not for you. Let's leave that where it is. And so it's really just a game of tuning. And like, I mean, if you look at roadies on tour with big bands, I'm sure they get really good at tuning where they just go and they know it right away. Right? Well, the first time you tune a guitar, you probably go, you're going back and forth like 1,000 times till you get it right. And so I think that's how I would do it with you guys is make a hypothesis from this, give you a drill, test it. Did it do what we wanted it to do force-wise? Did the launch monitor tell us better or worse things? Okay, cool. Let's see where we go from there. Yeah, okay. And that's the best way to do it. And obviously it's hard to do it that way with, hit on a plate once every 4 years or whatever, because you change stuff every month probably or every couple of days.
So that's where having more technology like this and more places where you can get on it more often
and really understand what clicks for you. Yeah. And then I think, if something goes wacky at some point, like if you lose a ton of speed at some point, you get back on here and you say, oh, it's totally this force or that pressure shift and I think it can get you back a lot quicker. But that being said, your body could have changed, little injuries happen, and I've had that with good players where we have to adjust things based on the body they have today.
Well, I definitely, when I'm, probably July, August, hop back on because I'll have ramped up.
Perfect.
At that point.
That's good, and that's cool how it's right across the street from you. So I'm sure the guys would have no problem for you coming in. And
maybe if I stop hitting them.
No, there'll be no tour players there in July, August. It'll be too hot.
Wouldn't you agree? I mean, this is very individualized, and some people might need all 3 ramped up, and some people might only need 2 of the 3 ramped up. Yeah. So what works for you is for you, and it shouldn't be something that someone says, okay, you should also be doing this. Yeah.
And it's like if somebody tells you need this without trialing and erroring it, they're just guessing. They don't know, because no one knows. There's 4 people on the planet that swing at the speeds that you guys swing at, and or 5 or whatever, there's not many. And so no one knows. And the way that you swing it fast is way different than the way that you swing it fast is way different than Kyle swings it fast. And so you have to look at that individual with their own anatomy and their own nervous systems and their own everything that's different about you. And now that your obliques hurt, it's a different swing than it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And that's where, having this information could, if you tweak something a week before Worlds, we could adjust these things to work around that tweak and get speed, and that's where it can become very valuable.
So now talk about his pressure. You made a little comment about it being more into the ball of his foot a little bit, but if you go back to address, and just so people know at home, pressure is a vertical force. Yep. So you can kind of see he starts there on his left side, 100% pressure. Is that more towards the heel?
It looks like it's pretty balanced. So you can see there's his heel, there's his toe. I guess it would be a little bit more towards his heel but this is he's not even swinging yet, right? This is rocking. And then when he puts this down, you can see that.
So he actually pushes off the heel
of his left foot, yes.
Yep, pushes off the heel. It goes back to the ball of the right foot.
And you can see there's a little blip of heel pressure here, but not much. So he's just
hanging out in the ball.
Is his heel actually on the mat, or is it off the mat?
Yeah, that's a good question. It could be a little bit off the mat, so that could be the issue. I think you would see some pressure here, so I think there's definitely more pressure in the ball of his foot. And that's something that, with really crap players, sometimes you want them to get away from that. They're almost going to fall over, right? And they're trying to find balance, whereas that could work for him. But really cool to me is this angle of this right foot. I mean, this would be a really cool hypothesis to look at your right hip and his right hip. They have to be aligned differently. Yeah. There has to be something different about yours, because when you went to push off your right foot, your foot turned in. He's clearly got a little flare there. That has to be something to do with the alignment of the joint or the anatomy that works best for you guys.
For sure. And then as he goes to the top, so right there he's got 90% pressure right under the ball of the foot. Go ahead and let's go up to the rest of the backswing. To the top.
And you see it never really rolls onto the outside. You always can see some kind of big toe pressure or first ball of the first metatarsal there.
He loses it a little bit towards the end.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
It lightens a little bit, so it goes to the outside towards the end of the, at this point, just like Justin, kind of back to that 50-50 mark at the top. I think Justin was arguably 55-45 with dominance on the lead side.
And you were shifted more to the left, right?
I
think you were more like 60 or 70 to the left at this point.
So the fastest guys in the world are getting that pressure back to the lead side a little bit more forward at the top of the swing. I think that kind of sets us up to get off the ground a lot faster.
Yeah.
And as he starts down, left arm parallel, 80% on the lead side.
Yeah, and this is where he's getting, I remember we went to your peak vertical and you were like 60-40, he's 80-17, and so, or 83 and 17. So I think if we had to test him, I think he'd probably have a much stronger left leg compared to the right, or a more imbalanced probably, where you'd probably be a little less imbalanced. I mean, but that's just a hypothesis, who knows. And imbalances are not a bad thing. They work in some people. So, but I think swinging towards your strength is the key thing. So, and if Kyle tweaks something in his left side, he might want to get to 60-40 to produce his vertical force, because his left side isn't working so well that particular day or that particular week or whatever. So, and I have seen that quite a bit with good players. We have to, really cool though, you can see his big toe pressure even through his shoe there. He's really shoving that big toe in the ground. And we talked about that, the evidence that the big toe needs to be in the ground for the glute to turn on. So
Interesting.
And the glute is a big, powerful hip extensor, so the big toes in the ground is where it produces his max vertical.
Do we see that in the right foot at all, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, remember we were back here, you can kind of see, I mean, it's faint, but it kind of goes up there where the big toe would be. So and obviously the vertical force is way lower here, so he's not pushing as hard, but you can definitely see the whole ball of the foot and up towards the big toe there. So yeah, I struggled to see how getting to the outside could ever be an athletic move. I mean, you talked about that.
Yeah, and then you go down to left arm parallel again. So we'll so use 80% forward pressure. Okay, so 83% forward at left arm parallel, and then go down to club shaft parallel if you could. So right there, so then it's actually going back, so he's pretty much 50-50. It's just going back because he's jumping basically, so off the lead foot. I think the lead foot's coming off the ground. And so you always have to interpret pressure in terms of the amount of vertical force that's happening. So here he only weighs 146 pounds. He only weighs 70% of his body weight, so pressure here isn't as important as it is here, where he weighs 260, he weighs like 560 pounds or whatever. So what's the point where he's unweighting the most in the downswing?
In the well, the most unweighting is like right at impact, where he only weighs 25 pounds right here, or just after impact.
But what about through the transition? So as he's lowering, like what would you attribute to that massive vertical spike? I mean, is there a lot of
There is an unload, yeah. I mean, the unload, he only weighs 86 pounds here. He weighs 40% of his body weight, so going down is unloading, and then you have to decelerate that downward motion and create the upward motion, which is this big spike here. So, and you do it so quickly and that's where that rate of force development, and that's something that will be in the software eventually. That's an easy calculation that we'll have in there, and yours is going to be off the charts. It'll be thousands of newtons per second.
That's awesome. Yeah. So and again,
this was Kyle in 2019.
Yeah.
Or no, 20, wasn't it?
No.
Yeah, it was 20. It was January of 20. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see him without the rock now.
Yeah, and like you say, stuff changes all the time, right? Yeah. You change stuff in your swing, and that creates little tweaks, and you guys are dealing in such little micro motions that are creating 2-3 extra miles an hour, which is the difference. So that's why measuring it more often is important. But in the end, until we get tons more data, it'll be making a quick hypothesis and saying, try this. And if it does what we think it does for the force, and launch monitor tells us better things, and you feel solid contact, and then we might be onto something. So,
all right, well, we'll close with this last thing. So if you were to look at Kyle's stuff and say that he needed to improve one thing, where would you go?
Whew, I mean, this was like my model for so long. I mean, just based on what you two guys showed me today, I mean, his club speed in this one is much less than yours. So you guys were in the high 150s, he's in the high 140s. And it's the vertical where he's 268. I think you were like in the 280s, and you're 302. So
does that play a role in body weight though too? Because he's lost quite a bit of weight. I think he's weighing about 195 now.
Interesting.
Does body weight play into that?
Well, that's as a percentage of his body weight. So I mean, that's telling us, because if I'm moving the club, well, the club's attached to me, and I have to move me before the club moves, and so I have to move my weight. So that's why we put it in percent body weight, because I've seen little kids that get, like little girls that are, 60 pounds, that get 200 something percent of their body weight and they're jumping off the ground because they only have to move 60 pounds worth of person before the club moves. So yeah, I don't know. That would be interesting to see what that would change. And again, he wasn't getting into a dark place when he was hitting this day. He was just kind of
grooving, baby.
Yeah, he was just cruising and hitting for some people, and he had to make sure he wasn't going to hit anyone on his backswing. So I would argue that this would go up a lot when he really started to try to rip it. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that would be the place that I would look at. But again, yeah, stuff can change all the time. You don't know. He's not rocking back and forth anymore, so maybe the horizontal forces come down. Who knows? Maybe that was too much horizontal force for him. It's possible.
Yeah, he doesn't. When you look at him, he looks like, even when he's hitting iron shots, looks more like a centered golf swing.
Right.
He doesn't look like he's got a ton of.
And he's got a lot of.
linear.
I mean, I think his torque might be higher even now when I see how much he rotates through it and jumps backwards. Like there's a lot of torque happening there. I don't know if he's trying. I think he plays a lot of regular golf too. So, and that could be different too. And that would be interesting to see, like how the regular golf swings compare to the long drive swings. Do the patterns stay the same and you just ramp it up, or are they completely different pattern? I don't know.
Well, guys, Tim, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Lots to learn.
Thank you for your
Yes.
time as
Thank you,
always.
man. That was awesome.
Guys, we want to thank TPC Sawgrass for allowing us to come out and film with these guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe if you have not yet subscribed. All of our traces are available on
Swingcatalyst.com.
Okay, so if you guys want to go buy those, you can buy those. And then lastly, thank you to our title sponsor, Iron Jock, best clothing out there. We'll see you next time.